Hello everyone, and welcome to this talk from me about good energy and specifically around solar power in the UK. My name's Tom Parsons and I'm the Director of Sales here at Good Energy. I live in Exeter in the southwest. I've got solar on my rooftop and I drive an EV. I've also got a heat pump being installed at the moment, so pretty soon I'll be off gas and 100% on renewable electricity for the whole of my home, which was quite an important thing for me. I've been working in energy and renewables for nearly 20 years now, and I think as a country, we've done amazing progress on renewables over that period and moving away from fossil fuels. But there is still a lot more to do, and solar plays a big part in that, which is what I'll be talking about today. As the Director of Sales, I'm responsible for delivering about £250 million of sales per year for Good Energy. And that's everything from selling solar panels to heat pumps and also energy supply tariffs. My main priority really is making sure that we design bespoke products for customers. So although solar panels and things like that may seem like you sort of just bolt them onto any roof however you like, it's all about creating the right design for the customer based on things like their energy usage and what other things they have. Do they have electric heating? Do they have electric vehicles, etc.? And if you get that design right and use quality components, then the customers tend to be very happy out the other side of it, whether that's a business customer, a customer in the education sector like a school, or even a household. So like me here living in this house. And Good Energy has the highest Trustpilot score out of all the energy suppliers in the UK. So we do know that our customers really care about the quality of the products that we sell to them, and they recognise that we are sort of at the top tier of that, which is great. And there's two main things I love about working in the energy industry. The first thing is really a sense of purpose. So I get to come to work every day knowing that the activity I'm doing is helping to decarbonise the UK. It's helping to make sure that we combat climate change and we make sure that the planet is fit for the future, that we all have a reasonable quality of life as we move forwards. And the second thing that's great working in this industry is just the amount of people, different types of people I get to work with. One day I could be working with an IT professional, building a new technology system for us. And then the next day I could be working with a roofer who's installing panels on a household or a business. And getting to work with so many different people is really engaging for me. And it's something I'm very happy about at this stage in my career. Let me introduce you to Good Energy then. So we're currently on our 25th birthday. So we've just hit 25 years old. We were founded right at the end of 1999 by Juliet Davenport. And Juliet's quite special because at the time that she founded Good Energy, the UK's energy grid, so that's the energy infrastructure in the UK, was only about 1% renewable. The other 99% of electricity being used and generated in the UK was from coal, it was from gas, it was from nuclear, all things that aren't renewable power. And Juliet wanted to grow the amount of renewable power in the UK. So she founded Good Energy to help enable that. And since then, we've gone from 1% renewable generation in the UK to somewhere between 40 and 50% today. So a really great achievement. And one of the other special things about Juliet was she was the first female CEO of an energy company in the UK. So again, we managed to get a slightly different perspective by having a bit of diversity leading the company, whereas all the other energy companies in the UK were led by men and were following sort of similar historic patterns in terms of the best way to run those energy companies. So a couple of bits about us. We've helped thousands of renewable energy projects get built, and that could be solar panels on rooftops. It could be hydro systems, so a small turbine in a river that a landowner has. It could be wind turbines. All those sort of renewable projects, we've helped support them and make sure they get paid for the power that they export and sell back to the grid. We also supply electricity to over 50,000 households in the UK. So if you on your walk home or have a look around your neighbourhood, chances are somebody there is getting 100% renewable electricity from Good Energy, and that's from those renewable sources I just mentioned. We also buy a lot of renewable power from households, so we've got even more of those that sell their power to us. So 200,000 households with solar panels in the UK now sell any excess electricity they generate back to Good Energy, and we pay them a good rate for that. So again, looking around, if you see solar panels on someone's roof, chances are it'll be Good Energy that's buying the power from them. We've installed solar and heat pumps on thousands of households as well and businesses. But one of the things we're really proud about is our B Corp status. So some of you or many of you may be aware of the B Corp movement, and that's all about changing the way business is done, because historically businesses have been focused on maximizing their profit, and that tends to be regardless of anything else. It's all about making more money for shareholders or for owners. and that can be very destructive for the environment. And what B Corp does is it says, well, profit is important, but actually there are several other important things as well. So profit is important. The people around you working for you and in the environments you're operating in are important. And then the planet is also important. And B Corp changes the way you operate as a business and said, those three things are now my top priority. And I have to prove in the decisions I make that I do care about people, planet, as well as profit. And for Good Energy to get that, it took about a year and a half to get accredited. It's really important for us, and it does show that we're genuinely doing the right thing. So I'll now share a short video with you that explains how solar panels generate electricity. Now, this is the only really sciencey bit in my talk here today. And if you don't understand it exactly, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a scientist to work in renewables or to understand how it works. But I want to share it with you just to give you a bit of a feel for solar and really just how magical the technology is.
How do solar panels generate electricity? Electricity is the flow of electrons around a circuit. In a solar panel, energy from the sun prompts these electrons to start flowing. But how? It's all to do with the photovoltaic cells that solar panels are made from. Photovoltaic cells are made out of two layers of silicon. One layer is positively charged and the other is negatively charged, creating an electric field that will enable an electric current to be generated. When sunlight hits the cell, light particles knock some of the electrons within the silicon free from their bonds. These are drawn to the positively charged silicon layer. However, a bridge between the two layers only lets electrons cross in one direction, from positive to negative. So instead, the electrons are collected by conductive metal plates that move them from the solar cell into a circuit where they flow freely as electricity. This electricity can be used in your home, stored in a battery or electric car, or exported to the electricity grid. Standard solar panels will generate 100% renewable electricity for 25 to 30 years. Good Energy buys electricity from hundreds of solar generators in Britain, along with supporting over 100,000 people who generate their own solar power at home. Switch to Good Energy for power from sun, wind and water.
So a quick intro there to how solar panels work. And for me, the important thing is that scientists have done this great job creating this technology for us and generating zero carbon electricity. Now it's up to us to use it as much as possible and to knock out things like fossil fuels that are in our fuel mix. And that brings me on to what's known as our fuel mix. So it's the different fuel sources that we get electricity from in the UK. And there's one website that's been around for quite a while now, but I like looking at it. It's called Gridwatch. So if you just go to gridwatch.co.uk, you can see on any day, at any time, where the electricity is coming from in the UK. So I took this picture from when I was creating the presentation, and that was at the end of January, so cold and wintry day. But it gives you a snapshot at that point in time where the electricity was coming from the UK. And so as the time of looking at this, solar was creating about 10% of the power in the UK. So that means 1 for every 10 units of electricity consumed anywhere in the UK is coming from solar, which is not bad in the middle of winter. And actually, when we move to summer, you often see that number get up to about 30%. So almost a third of power at any given point is coming from solar. Pretty impressive. And the UK government is doing a lot of work at the moment to grow that even faster. So in 2025, they want to boost that by another 50%. So half as much installed capacity again this year. And they've got big targets for 2030. So if you think sort of 5 years forward where you're going to be in your lives, there's a high chance that a lot of the things you do and that consume electricity, there's a chance that a lot of that power will be coming from solar, which is a great place to be. And so as we look at this chart here, a few of the other fuel sources we have at the moment, the big orange one, which does deliver a lot of power over the winter period, is gas. So it's called CCGT, but that just stands for combined cycle gas turbine. So it burns gas, and that's used to spin a turbine, which generates electricity. So it's necessary right now as we go through this energy transition, but we do need to replace it with renewables as soon as possible. And then below that on the chart, you've got things like biomass, wind, and then solar that I mentioned. These are the renewable energy products that really are helping decarbonize the UK and protect our planet. Now, I've mentioned solar at the moment is at 10%. In summer, it goes to 30%. But what I find interesting is 15 years ago, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things, solar was at 0%. So we've gone from a standing start 15 years ago to a pretty strong position now, and it's only growing from here. And then just below solar, you'll see coal, which is on here, but it's at 0% right now. Now, when we look back 15 years ago, again in the UK, coal was at 28%. So over a quarter of all power was being generated from coal, and coal really is bad for the environment. So we've proven that we can change. And I think, the UK as a whole, this is a great testament to the fact that we can get off fossil fuels and transition into renewables. Now we just need to keep going on that journey and innovating and installing more. So you may be asking the question of, well, how important is solar in the grand scheme of things to help us get to net zero? And the answer is pretty straightforward. It's very important, because without solar, we can't get to net zero as a country or even as a planet. And without net zero, our planet becomes hostile to life pretty quickly. And the reason solar is so important is electricity that's generated from burning coal or gas creates a lot of carbon dioxide or CO2. And this is bad, as the CO2 gets into our atmosphere and it creates that warming effect that traps heat on the planet. And that's a big part of what causes global warming and causes a lot of the nasty effects that we're already seeing, the fires and the flooding and the disruption that's caused by that. But solar panels don't create any carbon dioxide when they're generating electricity. So for every solar panel we install, it means there's slightly less coal or gas that the country uses, slightly less CO2 going to the atmosphere, and a slightly healthier planet for us to all to live on. And sometimes you'll hear about people saying that global warming and the climate crisis are just natural cycles for our planet. And it's true, we have seen temperatures heating on the planet when we go back hundreds of millions of years or even billions of years. And we've seen 5 major extinction events over the last 500 million years as well. But they normally take a very long time to happen. Long time in the history of the planet, you're talking over millions of years, not over tens of years. And that's what fossil fuels are doing for us at the moment. They're accelerating that massively. So the planet isn't used to seeing this rapid amount of change. And sometimes when we talk about saving the planet, we're actually not really talking about saving the planet. We're talking about saving ourselves, because the planet's been through these extinction events before, and it will be absolutely fine. And actually, it does recover after these events. But if I asked you to guess how long you think it would take for the planet to recover after an extinction event with rapid warming, well, the answer is it took 10 million years after the last event for the planet to get back to livable conditions. So I certainly haven't got 10 million years to wait. And I know most of you are probably thinking the same as well. And I'll finish this slide with a quote from Thomas Edison over on the right-hand side. So bonus points for those of you who know who he is. He is, of course, the inventor of the light bulb, among other things. He also invented one of the first modern motion cameras, so a precursor to video cameras, and also the electric power generator. And this was 100, 125 years ago he was around. And yet even at that time, when he's inventing these things that use electricity for the first time, already he's recognizing the power of solar energy and saying how much better it is than the oil and coal that they were using at the time. So it's taken us a while to catch up with Thomas Edison, but he knew what he was talking about. And now we're starting to deliver that solar energy transition that he was so hopeful for. Now, of course, when we talk about solar systems, there are different types of solar. So I'd like to touch on what it means around panels and inverters. And I'll touch a little bit later on around batteries as well, because I know that's always a big question about how important storage is. So despite what the science introduction showed you earlier, solar panels really are very simple. You create the panel itself, which is those polysilicate sheets, and then you bolt them to a roof using a mounting system, which is literally just a set of metal rails, and then they're all wired together. And these wires take that electricity down to something called an inverter, which is a smallish box that's attached to the side of the house. And the inverter's job is to change the current from direct current. So you get direct current, also known as DC, from the sun, and that's what the solar panels are creating. And the inverter just changes that from DC into alternating current, which is AC. And that's the type of electricity that houses and buildings like to use. And from here, the electricity is either used by the building or it's exported back to the grid. And then it can be used by other businesses or households in the local area, helping give them renewable power as well. Now, the type of solar panel themselves aren't actually that important. They are about 2 meters tall and about 1 meter wide. So a little bit taller than me, a little bit wider than me. but they're all very similar. They generate about 25% efficient power. So for all the power the sun delivers onto them, they convert about 25% of that into electricity, which is about a quarter of the sun's power, which is pretty good. And a lot of innovation has taken them to that level, but we probably won't see it with the current generation of technology get much higher than maybe 30%. So they're close to maturity in terms of how well they perform at the moment. For me, the most important part of a solar system is actually how well optimized they are. So I've got two drawings here on the slide, and we'll start on the right-hand side and look at the string style system. And string just means they're all wired effectively together in one long string. And that's the older way of installing them. But the problem with a string system, as you can see from the picture, if you look at the left-hand panel on the right-hand side, it's got a slight bit of cloud going over it, which means it can only perform at 90%. And because all the others are wired in the same string as well, they all automatically drop down to 90% as well, even though they're not covered by the cloud and they're fully in sun. And it's the same if you get leaves on the solar panel or bird poo or whatever it is that's covering them. It means all of them in the string deteriorate in their output, which isn't very good for the system because you're wasting the opportunity to generate electricity. So we move over to the modern solution, and that's an optimized system, which is the one that for most businesses and households, it makes a lot of sense to have. So here we've got a solar edge system. And as you can see, you've got that same cloud shielding one of the panels a little bit. So that panel drops down to 90%, but all the others carry on running at 100%. And by setting it up this way, over the course of a year, the panels collectively will deliver about 20% more power than they would otherwise, than they would if they were in a string system. So it's those optimizers that are really important when designing a system. And those are the only types that Good Energy use to make sure that the customers are getting sort of maximum solar from their roof space. So let's take a look at a school building, for example, and say, well, how do we decide if solar is suitable for the school? And at Good Energy, we've installed solar systems on a big range of schools, everything from academies, universities, trusts. And this is done through Emilio Solar, which is part of Good Energy. And there are three main questions we ask, and then a lot of smaller ones around the suitability for the school and whether it's the right thing for them to invest in. And first of all is the lifespan. So is the roof going to last for 25 years? Because that's how long these solar panels last for. You put them up there and then they generate for 25 years and longer in some cases, but that's what they're sort of warranted for, which is a phenomenal period of time. So we have to make sure the roof is going to be able to support them for that length of time. And if not, then we'll work with the school and say, right, do you want to replace the roof or do you want it reinforced? And just work around some ways to make it so that it can be suitable for solar. And of course, fixing a roof is good for the school anyway, because nobody wants leaking roofs, leaking into sports halls or anything like that. So it improves the comfort of the school as well. And then the second question is placement, really. Is the roof big enough? Can you get enough solar panels up there to make a really good contribution to the school's usage? Get as much of it as possible consuming power from solar on the rooftop. And is it facing the right direction? Now, south's pretty good as a direction to face, but east and west can also be very good depending on the location of the school. And you can put solar panels on the north-facing roofs. They just, their output's lower because you've got less sun directly hitting that roof over the course of a year-long period. Things like sports halls here are great because actually a lot of the time when we look at rooftops, especially on a school, you have a whole bunch of things up there, whether it's roof windows, air conditioning units, even beehives we've seen up there. Whereas sports halls tend to be a little bit more modern and more of a straightforward roof that's easier to install on. It means you can get a good amount of panels. And then the last big question is the business case. So making sure it's the right financial decision for that school or educational establishment. And the big part of that is how much electricity does the school consume? Because the best savings a school can make is instead of having to buy that electricity from a supplier at what can be quite an expensive rate and goes up and down quite a lot as well. So it's not good for things like budgets. So instead of having to do that, can they generate it on the roof and use it themselves? So we tend to design systems that look at the school's consumption and then say how much of that consumption can we meet from the rooftop? And then that gives something that's known as a payback period. So it says, if I use a very basic example, if the system costs £100,000, but it saves you £10,000 a year in electricity costs, then the payback period would be 10 years. You're saving £10,000 a year and you spend £100,000. And those sort of financials help schools make the decisions around what they want to do. And I'll give you an example of that in a couple of slides' time for an academies trust that we've done a number of installations at. And there's a couple of other bits that we also consider. So one of them is safety. So again, using things like that solar edge system means that the system can be fire safe. So if there's ever an issue, it can be remotely disconnected and there's no risk to the school or the pupils that are using that school. And that's really important. Another thing is around accreditations. So you need to have a lot of accreditations, some of which are shown on the right-hand side of this slide under the Emilio logo, which just says that you're fit and proper, you're qualified, and your processes are right to make sure you do a quality installation that's safe for everyone and is going to last in the long run. Because the last thing a school wants to do is invest a lot of money and then find out the system's not working in a few years' time and not know how they're going to fix it. Now, I promised I'd mention batteries. So here's a couple of examples, both for sort of households and smaller businesses, and then all the way up to larger businesses as well. Now, batteries themselves aren't renewable. All a battery does is store electricity from a source. So if you put renewable electricity into the battery, great, it's now got renewable electricity. Whereas if you use electricity generated from gas, then that's the same stuff that comes out. But what that does mean is if you pair batteries with that renewable generation, so your solar panels in this case, then they can be a really powerful part of that net zero puzzle. So we'll start with the Tesla Powerwall 3. I'm sure most of you are aware of Tesla. You've certainly seen the cars on the road. Well, they're actually very big in household batteries and small business batteries as well. And they make probably the best battery on the marketplace at the moment. And this is the Tesla Powerwall 3. It's got an output of about 13.5 kilowatt hours. And for context, that means you could power a house from a typical domestic household for about 2 days or longer if you started not using too much electricity. You can use it for things like backup when there's power cuts. You can charge it from your solar, which is obviously one of the big use cases from it, which would take about 2 hours with a normal size system on a house. And you can also charge it with cheaper overnight tariffs as well. So it becomes a really key component in helping households become net zero, but also making savings on their energy bill as well. And then we move over to the business side of things. And I've got a large business battery here by a company called Rayleigh, which are less well known, but they are making some big units. Now, the first thing that will jump out is it's certainly not as attractive as the Tesla unit, but that's fine because the Tesla battery will go on a household, which everybody wants their house to look nice. Businesses, this will be tucked around the back. But the important thing is it's 6.5 times. It has 6.5 times the output of the Tesla one, so it can power the business for a much longer period of time, relatively. So it will last about 2 hours, bearing in mind a business is consuming a lot more electricity than a house. The same thing applies for schools as well. Schools consume a lot of electricity. So it means they can be powered for about 2 hours solely using that battery. Again, can be used for backup. So if there's ever a power cut, it means things carry on as usual. Nobody's computers suddenly turn off, etc. And it can be used to help reduce bills as well by charging when power is cheap and then using it when it's more expensive. So batteries really are a key part of the puzzle. And we find about 90% of our customers at the moment, whether they're domestic or then even some of the business customers, are choosing to install those batteries alongside their systems because they think, well, I'm looking at the long-term sustainability of my house and I want to make sure I've got the right kit installed alongside that. So I'll share a case study with you now, and this focuses specifically on energy bills. So we've got Imogen's house here. So Good Energy did the solar installation for Imogen. She's got the panels you can see in this picture, and then there's some on the other side of the roof as well. And she's taken a look at her 12 months of consumption data from end of 2023 to end of 24, so middle of each, to see what her savings have been over the course of that year. And what you'll be able to see from this case study, and it's also on our website as well if you'd like to look at any of those things, which is goodenergy.co.uk. Her family of 4 used about 780 kilowatt hours of solar electricity generated directly from the panels. So the sun was shining and they had their oven on and they were consuming that electricity at the same time. And then they've consumed almost the same amount from the battery. So when they weren't in the house, the solar was charging the battery up. And then when they came home in the evening, again, turn the oven on or plug the car in, they had that renewable electricity ready to use. So in total, nearly 1,600 kilowatt hours of power that they haven't needed to take from the grid, that they've generated themselves. And that saves them about £432 on their electricity bill. So that's pretty good. That's material. Nobody would look down on £432. But one of the great things about renewable power, and particularly working with Good Energy, is you get paid for anything you export. So when Imogen wasn't using it directly in the house or wasn't using it to charge her battery, she was exporting it to the grid, which doesn't take any different infrastructure. It uses the same cables that will run out of your house that you already have. And she got paid for each of those units that were being exported. And that resulted in payments of £464 over the year. So when we add up the savings they've made plus the money that's been paid into Imogen's bank account, she's looking at a saving of or earnings of £896 over the year. And when we look at a system cost like this, you're probably talking £6,000–7,000 for the installation. You can start to see that within 8 or 9 years, Imogen's made back the money that she spent on the system. And then, of course, it lasts for 25 years. So from then on out, it's all upside. It's all extra money into her household. And that sort of story is really powerful for people when they're deciding, is solar the right thing for me, both financially and for the environment? And what about bigger solar installations? How does that impact their bills and what can they do with that extra money? So one of the installations, or a bunch of the installations that we've done, have been with Greenwood Academy Trust. We responded to their tender request to put solar on a range of their buildings across their trusts. And in total, we installed about 5,000 solar panels. So a very big job across a range of buildings. And you can see some of those on the pictures here, all the way on the right-hand side from the flat roof. So all the panels are angled slightly up on a mounting system, and then you've got your sloped roofs as well, so the panels are added straight onto them. And to date, the trust has generated over 3.27 gigawatt hours of solar electricity. So that's over 3 million kilowatt hours of electricity. So a very big amount. And what that means is they haven't had to take that 3 million units of electricity from the grid, from their supplier. And so over time, they'll be able to use those savings that they're making instead to invest in things that actually support their pupils across the trust. So it gives them more money for all sorts of things that schools need to run, having the best teachers, having sports facilities, being able to subsidize trips, all those great things that keep pupils engaged and make sure everyone's able to learn in a good environment. And because schools and businesses use so much more electricity and have bigger roofs than households, the payback for them is actually even faster than for households. So whereas I mentioned with Imogen, her payback was probably 7 years, give or take. Well, for a school like this, you're probably looking at a payback of about 5 years. So within 5 years, all the costs have been paid off through the savings and the earnings. And then it's just plain sailing there for the next 20 years as the panels continue to generate and the school makes all those savings. So that nearly brings me to an end with my presentation. And just in conclusion, I'd like to share this photo with you, which is one of the partners of Good Energy. So some of you may recognize the picture. This is the Wave, which is near Bristol. So it's just north of Bristol. And this is a inland man-made lake, which is specifically for surfing. So if you look at the picture in front of you, you've got the concrete walkway down the right-hand side. In that is a big turbine that spins and creates the waves that surfers can then use on both sides. And this was built inland as a way to get people back to nature, back to surfing, and really get involved with the water. But what they wanted to do was make sure that it was a sustainable project from design all the way through to implementation. So they've got a huge lot of solar panels around. So when the sun is shining, all those waves, the power to create those waves is generated from solar. So that's nice, renewable on-site generation. But then when the sun isn't shining, they wanted to make sure that they could still get renewable power. So they use Good Energy as a supplier, and we make sure that their power is sourced from other renewable sources, whether that's hydropower somewhere else, or wind, or anaerobic digestion. And that means that throughout the day, their customers know they can surf, but they're not adding anything to any carbon out into the atmosphere, which is very important for that community. And the Good Energy logo, as you can see in this picture, that's on one of the floodlights. So we recently sponsored the installation of those floodlights, which means surfers can now surf after dark here under the floodlights. And again, all the power for those floodlights is coming from renewable sources. So it's a really good story that brings this together, that says solar's such an important part of the solution for creating that zero carbon world, whether it's for businesses or for households. And it also creates some pretty fun venues that otherwise would be bad for the environment. And in this case, actually, it turns out to be great for the environment. And of course, great for all the people that are able to come along and enjoy the surfing there. So I'll leave you there, but thank you very much for listening. And hopefully I'll see some of you in the renewables industry in the future, or perhaps even working at Good Energy.